Every person who has ever played Chapter 1 looked at Huggy Wuggy standing in the lobby with his arm raised and thought the same thing. Mascot, display piece, the company's most beloved character posed at the entrance to greet visitors. That is what you are supposed to think. That is exactly what Playtime Co. needed you to think. Because here is what Huggy Wuggy actually is. What he has been since 1990 when they finished building him, and what Chapter 5 just confirmed with specific, documented, in-game evidence that changes the entire 5-chapter story of this franchise. Huggy Wuggy has cameras in his eyes. Not metaphorically, literally. Nanny cams, built into the plastic of his eye sockets, disguised behind the glassy stare that millions of children looked at on a toy shelf and felt safe around. He was a surveillance system wearing a mascot costume. Every employee who walked through that lobby, every visitor, every child on a factory tour, every executive who passed through without clearance, all of it recorded, all of it watched by the thing standing at the entrance with its arm raised in the welcome wave. And nobody suspected it because the most successful toy in Playtime Co.'s history was the last place anyone would think to look for a monitoring device. That was the design. That was the point. And once I walk you through what those cameras were recording, what Chapter 5's memory sequence reveals about how they turned a child into something willing to use them, and what the Hour of Joy tape shows us Huggy did the second the prototype gave the signal, this is not going to feel like a horror game monster story anymore. It is going to feel like the most deliberate, most specific, most perfectly executed act of institutional cruelty in this franchise. And it was hiding in plain sight in the lobby for 30 years. Let me start with the cameras, because this detail, confirmed in the game's environmental storytelling and documented on the official wiki, is the one that reframes everything that comes before Chapter 5 and everything that happens in it. Huggy Wuggy was positioned in the lobby of Playtime Co. from 1990 onward, 15 years before the Hour of Joy. 15 years of every person who entered that building walking past him, looking at his face, noting his glassy eyes and processing it as a display piece, as a prop, as the welcome wave of a company that wanted its visitors to feel the warmth of its most beloved character the moment they walked through the door. And what they were actually doing, every single one of them, from the lowest factory worker to the highest executive, was walking past a camera, being recorded, being monitored by something that could see everything in that lobby and transmit it back to whoever needed to know what was happening at the entrance of Playtime Co.'s facility. The most surveilled point of entry in the building was disguised as the most welcoming one, and the instrument of surveillance was a child. A boy from Playcare, an orphan, someone who had been put into an enormous blue body and stationed at a post and given no choice about any of it. He was the camera. He was the system. He was the welcome wave and the monitoring device simultaneously, and neither of those things was his choice. And nobody walking past him in 15 years of daily operation ever looked at him and thought, what is it like to be that? What is it like to stand here and watch everyone walk past and be seen by nobody? That is the thing that I cannot stop thinking about. Not the cameras as a security feature, the cameras as an experience. Because Huggy Wuggy was not a machine that happened to have cameras installed. He was a person, a boy in a constructed body with a consciousness that Chapter 5 confirms is still present, still carrying memories, still reachable through a neural mapping device in the conditioning rooms. He was watching, with awareness, every day for 15 years, and nobody looked back. Now here is where the memory sequence from Chapter 5 becomes the most important piece of evidence in Huggy Wuggy's entire story. Because when you access his memories, when you reach into the neural map and pull out what he carries, the thing that Chapter 5 shows you alongside the waking up memory is the bad toy box. And I need you to understand what the bad toy box actually is, because the community has processed it as a punishment mechanic, a way the facility disciplined misbehaving toys, and that is technically accurate, but completely undersells what it was and what it was designed to do.
Here is what the Dual Shockers breakdown confirmed about the bad toy box after Chapter 5 dropped. It is not a timeout. It is not a detention system. It is a shredder. The toys put inside it are killed, and when you hear Huggy's memory of it, when you experience what he experienced as a witness to that system, the purpose of letting him see it becomes clear. This was not punishing him. This was training him. This was Playtime Co. showing Experiment 1170 exactly what happened to experiments that did not comply, exactly what the facility was capable of, exactly what waited on the other side of disobedience. They conditioned him through fear of the machinery, through specific, graphic, lethal demonstrations of consequence. They showed a child what happened when you did not do what you were told, and then they stationed him at the door and waited. Bro, they broke him on purpose so he would work properly.
And here is the crazy part, because here is what the Hour of Joy tape shows us about Huggy Wuggy when the moment finally came. The prototype sent the signal, the massacre began, and Huggy, who had been standing in that lobby for 15 years with cameras in his eyes in the memory of the bad toy box in his head, and no choice about any of it, Huggy moved first. Not second, not in the middle of the chaos, first. The opening of the Hour of Joy, documented in the VHS tape found in Chapter 4, shows Huggy Wuggy dropping the statue act in the lobby in front of a crowd of employees and visitors, and jumping on a man and eating him. He is the first. He is the beginning of it. The most beloved character in Playtime Co.'s history, the face on the toys and the posters and the merchandise, the welcome wave at the entrance of the building, he was the opening move of the massacre. And I think the community has read that as he followed the prototype's orders and attacked. And that is true. But there is a layer underneath it that I do not think anyone has fully named. After 15 years of standing in that lobby, after 15 years of watching every person walk past and being seen by none of them, after 15 years of cameras in his eyes recording every face that did not look back, after the bad toy box and the conditioning and the welcome wave and the total absence of anything resembling the thing his name promised, after all of that, the prototype gave the signal. And Huggy moved first, not because he was the most obedient, because he was the most ready. This is the part I like to call the perfect weapon theory. Because here is what Playtime Co. actually built when they built Huggy Wuggy. Not a guard, not a mascot, not a surveillance system exactly, though he was all of those things. What they built was a weapon that came preloaded with 15 years of reason to be used. They did not need to program hostility into him. They created the conditions that made hostility the only rational outcome, and then stationed him at the door and waited for someone to give him permission. The cameras in his eyes were not just for monitoring visitors. They were for making sure Huggy saw everything. Every smiling face that walked past and did not notice him. Every child who hugged the toy version of him at the gift shop and did not know there was a boy inside the big one standing next to it. Every executive meeting that happened in his line of sight because nobody thought the display piece needed to be excluded from sensitive conversations. He saw all of it. He recorded all of it. He stood there with the welcome wave and the cameras and the memory of the bad toy box, and he watched for 15 years. And then he moved first. Now, I want to be precise about something, because this is the part of the theory where I need to stay in the evidence and not get ahead of it. I am not saying Huggy Wuggy is a hero. The Hour of Joy was monstrous regardless of the institutional cruelty that preceded it. The people who died in that lobby had not personally put him there. The worker who was eaten in the opening seconds of the massacre was not the one who installed the cameras in his eyes or ran the Bigger Bodies initiative or designed the bad toy box. And I want to be honest that the theory does not resolve that. It contextualizes it. There is a difference. What the perfect weapon theory does is answer the question that has never been properly answered in 5 chapters of this franchise. Why was Huggy Wuggy so specifically, so completely, so immediately hostile? Not just programmed aggressive, not just obedient to orders. First,
ready, moving before the chaos had a chance to build into anything? The theory answers that question with something much more uncomfortable than simple programming. He was not turned into a weapon. He was built into one by a company that understood exactly what it was creating and created it anyway because the welcome wave sold toys and the cameras kept the facility secure and the conditioning kept the experiment compliant, and none of those things required anyone to think about what it was like to be the experiment. And here is the piece that Chapter 5 adds to this that closes the loop across all 5 chapters in a way I find genuinely devastating. The neural mapping machine in the conditioning rooms exists so that we can access his memories to get a door code. That is the gameplay function. But what it means narratively, what it means that a machine exists in Playtime Co's facility that can reach into an experiment's consciousness and extract and display what they carry, is that Playtime Co knew. They built the capability to look inside the minds of their experiments. They had the technology to see what was in there, and they used it for conditioning, for monitoring, for compliance assessment. They reached into the neural maps of children they had turned into experiments and looked at what was in there and used it to make them more useful. And what was in Huggy Wuggy's neural map, what has been in there across 35 years of this franchise's timeline, is the memory of waking up in a body that is not his. And nobody at Playtime Co., in 15 years of the cameras in his eyes and the welcome wave and the bad toy box conditioning, ever looked at that memory and changed what they were doing to him. We looked at it in Chapter 5. We pulled it out, used it to open a door, and kept running. We were not better than Playtime Co. We were more honest about what we were doing with it, because at least we were running for our lives. They were running a corporation. And here is where Chapter 6 lives in this theory. Because Huggy Wuggy is alive, confirmed. Ambiguous status in the biodiversity labs, head moved, hand shifted, the franchise's most reliable survival record still holding. In the prototype, who installed him at that door, who used him as the opening move of the Hour of Joy, who then in Chapter 5 stabbed him and took his limbs and left the container behind, the prototype has now done to Huggy what Playtime Co. did to him. Used him, taken what was valuable, discarded the rest. And Huggy, who has cameras in his eyes and 35 years of being used as an instrument, and the memory of waking up in a body that is not his and the specific personal grief of 4 seconds with Kissy before the blade came, Huggy is still in the biodiversity labs, still moving, still carrying all of it. And the question Chapter 6 has to answer is what happens when the perfect weapon is no longer pointed by the person who built it. Because here is the thing. The welcome wave was never his choice. The cameras were never his design. The bad toy box conditioning, the mascot positioning, the surveillance function, the Hour of Joy opening move, none of it came from him. It was done to him and aimed through him and used up by the people who built him. And now the last person who was aiming him just took his arms and left him on the floor of the biodiversity labs with every reason in this franchise's history to be done being aimed. And something without 15 years of conditioning and a prototype's orders and a company's surveillance function pointed through it, something that gets to decide for itself which direction to move, is a completely different thing from a guard, or a mascot, or a weapon. It might be something this franchise has never had before, and I think Chapter 6 is the chapter where we find out what that looks like. Drop your theory in the comments because I want to know. Did you know about the nanny cams in his eyes before this video? Because that detail has been sitting in the game since Chapter 1, and most people have never stopped on what it actually means to be the camera that everyone walks past. And if you want the full breakdown of everything the cameras would have recorded across 15 years of Playtime Co.'s operation, the meetings, the decisions, the moments where executives discussed the Bigger Bodies initiative in front of the lobby display and did not think about whether the display was listening, that is the most disturbing breakdown in this franchise's history, and it is coming. Let me know you want it, because the Welcome Wave saw everything. And Chapter 6 is the chapter where everything it saw finally has somewhere to go.